Hello, good evening. Welcome to the brand new episode of Bilateral View. I'm Rodora, and with me is my co-host, Professor Arup Chatterjee, the best-selling author of Great Indian Railways. I'd like to ask, how are you, Professor Chatterjee?
Not too bad at all. Dr. Magan, how have you been?
Same. Everything's great by God's grace. And I know it's more compelling tonight because we are having this great person, Noah Harari. Um, we are going to be sharing a lot of things about him. But before that, I would like to say thank you to our audience because they had a beautiful, beautiful reception of episode one. And this is beautiful that they're very intrigued and they're interested in what we have to say. So tonight is another discussion that for sure would make them feel happy to hear whatever this is that we want to share with them. So, Professor Chatterjee, there is the big thing, information. Noah Harari is capitalizing on this as if information is a very monstrous thing, but not really. He's a good writer, right? You and I agree. There's this heroism attached to information, being the hero of history, as what he said in the book. What do you mean by that? Or how do you perceive it?
Well, thank you for that question, Dr. Magan. That's a remarkable question on multiple levels. So, notice the way you constructed that, and you deliberately chose Yuval Noah Harari's middle name to
Mm-hmm.
introduce him to audiences. You mentioned his name Noah instead of
Mm-hmm.
Yuval. So that was a choice in information selection. That is not necessarily a heroic or a malicious choice. That's merely something in relation to people's maybe cultural choices or certain kinds of conditioned responses, or in extreme cases it could be biases or prejudices. But it becomes relevant when we acquire a critical mass of people that information starts becoming a capital. The
Mm.
way I choose to pronounce, spell, articulate a single proper noun does not make it critical information as much as, let's say, if 100,000 people come together and want to vote for a political party based
Mm-hmm.
on its credentials, its genealogy, based on its manifesto, and so on. And then we are sifting through a lot of information. So information naturally becomes the hero in such tales. But I'm not telling the tale very truthfully enough. So, to give you a couple of examples from Yuval Noah Harari's book Nexus, which was released on the 10th of September,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Harari mentions the print revolution, which starts roughly around the late 15th century with the invention of the printing press in 1475 by Gutenberg, and by 1486, in 11 years from the time of that invention, there's
Mm-hmm.
this Austro-German churchman and inquisitor, Heinrich Kramer, who writes this amazing best-selling book, which, as Harari describes it in his multiple interviews and in his book Nexus, is a DIY, do-it-yourself witch hunt manual. And this is a best-selling book. Can you imagine? Which actually teaches people, it inspires people to identify the messengers of Satan, who is rumored to be leading a global revolution around this time, and to identify those quote unquote witches who were prior to the 15th and 16th century. They were not really gendered, but
Mm-hmm.
strangely these witches start acquiring especially the female sex by now. And Kramer's book inspires people how to do it yourself, how to go on witch hunts. And it is not Copernicus, it is not Galileo's books that are the bestsellers of the so-called scientific revolution or the Renaissance, but it is Kramer's
Uh-huh.
book, ironically speaking. The second kind of allegory of information that I can point you to is this amazing episode that occurs in 1918 during the
Mm-hmm.
First World War, when the American expeditionary forces are caught behind enemy lines and they are fighting against the Germans and they are trying to liberate France. And Major Charles Bitsley, the American major who was caught behind enemy lines, realizes that he is under fire. His battalion is under fire from the friendly American forces because they are providing covering fire and they don't know
Mm.
the exact location of the American troops. So a message has to be sent urgently to the friendly side, and Major Whittlesey, ties this tiny canister to the neck of Char Ami, the
Mm.
pigeon, and this becomes a heroic pigeon who then flies 45 kilometers in 40 minutes and is shot by a German fire, but somehow survives miraculously. Its right leg, where the canister is tied, is held,
Mhm.
just by its tendon, and would have been almost dead had it reached 5 minutes later, but it survives, and then it's parceled off to America and it becomes a war hero. These are
Uh-huh.
two allegories of information technology that, to summarize very, very crudely, we can suggest Harari to be providing to us. The first kind of information is where you abuse,
Mhm.
a kind of a information capital. The second is when you actually take information and try to save people. So I think eventually Harari gives us a choice, and he seems to suggest that we do have some sort of free will in this whole
Mm.
transaction, but the truth is far more complex.
Mhm.
So answer is yes and no, Dr. Magan. It is information is both the hero and not the hero.
Mhm. You're so right about a lot of those things. Harari never pinned down a single note there. It was really the
Hmm.
volition of you and me, of you, of the you and the entire race. Because if you read the entire book, there's just a very positive note right there. It's our responsibility. But before we move on, going back, that's a very poor bird, but that's a heroic bird at the same time. I mean, um, history would say, okay, the pigeon had been doing great. And if you go back to Noah's Ark, you see there's that dove and doing some marvelous things
Yes,
again, conveying them, okay, the water's already abated. And yeah, this is the proof, the leaf, the olive. And
the
that's
olive
wonderful.
branch.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that's beautiful because it's the bird doing it. And when you mentioned that early on, I just sort of recall that from the Noah's Ark story. And it's true. It's the yes and no all the time. I couldn't forget that coming from you. The yes and no binary all the time. You can't pin down one thing right there. It's just beautiful how information can be either the hero or or the villain. And we're moving on to that perspective as to how can an information be a villain, talking about the populist ideologies. But before that, and Harari as well mentioned this the blurring of lines between truth and um, history, of course, and at the middle there's information, or on either side there's information. So how do you account for this? How do we get to access accurate information, and how does that impact our way of moving on in the society where we need progress and everything, especially that it's always necessary in every decision making that we do?
Harari would not answer that question, and I'm not sure if we are equipped to answer that question as easily as
Oh,
that. But
really?
at the same time, we have to raise that question,
Mm-hmm.
repeated, because Harari raises that question in the very beginning of his book. He provides us a model wherein he tells us that of information does not mean more of truth. In
Mm.
fact, sometimes too much information could be driving us away from truth as well.
Yeah.
So, in his model of information, truth, power, and wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
he seems to suggest that information leads to order and not truth. And it is
Mm.
order that sometimes can lead to truth,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it can lead to abuse of power. And without going to this threshold of truth, you can never acquire wisdom. So,
Mm.
information definitely does not directly lead to wisdom under any circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it leads to order. And this is the whole dialectic that Harari is setting up. Now, you mentioned the word binary. It's actually
Mm.
not binary. It's a non-dual scheme. There's a
Yeah.
word for it in Greek philosophy. It's called pharmakon. So the word in Greek philosophy, pharmakon, actually means the sacrificial goat.
Mm.
It is both the hero and the scapegoat. So there's no villain in here. And that is how this, what you termed as binary, but what I would rather term the non-dual pharmakon needs to be seen as. So essentially, you need to look at information as not something innocent, because
Mm.
information has been sifted through human senses, human conditioning, human culture, human prejudices. And like I said, once these cultures of conditioning or biases or prejudices acquire a critical mass, that is to say, when big capitalists or large communities of people are coming together and selecting information in a tailor made fashion, particularly then information is at its most dangerous. Now, that creates order for some people, and it
Mm.
creates what Harari would call a cognitive capitalism. So it
Mm.
creates a capitalism based on information assets, and based on storytelling capacities that
Mm.
some of us possess, others don't. Here in
Mm.
storytelling is not purely a skill of how you put together characters and create a plot, but it is also the art of creating memes. And
Mm.
certain memes, as you know, do better than the others. Others just die. They can't evolve. So memes are very selfish in that way, and that these memes or these stories have this alliance with populist political tendencies. So
Right.
that needs to be taken care of. And if we are more mindful of populist ideologies, maybe we could minimize, if not entirely
Mm.
reduce, the kind of abuse of information that we're talking about.
So it's like you're talking about the self-correcting mechanisms, because Harari as well is so keen on saying that, for us to survive in this type of struggle, there has to be some self-correcting mechanisms. And these are the saviors in the process of, accessing uh, truthful information. And since you're talking about the populist ideology, how do you seem to include that in the conversation? Do you find them the great strategists, because they seem to weaponize information, and in doing so they're sort of succeeding at some point?
Yeah, I mean, this is a complex question, really. And if you want anyone to pin down specific ideologies of what you mean by populist, or what I mean by populist, or what somebody else means by populist, we'll have different answers. But Harari makes it very clear that he's not referring to either the left or the right. In
Uh-huh.
fact, you will find that he's talking about Bolsonaro and Donald Trump in the same vein
Yes.
that he's talking about Karl Marx and Michel Foucault.
Uh-huh.
And Harari says that although the Donald Trumps of the world do not read Karl Marx and Michel Foucault, who are, by the way, leftists, some of them radical leftists. Michel Foucault was quite, although he was not he gave up on the Marxist project by 70s, but still he continues to belong to the left. But
Mm.
although the twain shall not meet, the right and the left should not meet in public spaces. There's this, according to Harari, these are not my opinions, but Harari
Mm.
says that there's this curious intermixing of the left and the right in their radical extremes. And
Mm-hmm.
both of them seem to have this amazing tendency of wanting to monopolize information as capital.
Mm. On both ends they have this amazing tendency to actually manipulate it, and there's that curiosity, as you said. Well, very interesting.
Yeah, precisely, because Harari points out how Michel Foucault used to say that even an institution like science and something as noble as medicine
Mm-hmm.
could be monopolized for capitalist and for hierarchical and manipulative ends
Mm-hmm.
by big capital and by governmentality. Now, Harari is not entirely in favor of Michel Foucault's claim here, but he's
Mm-hmm.
telling us that how somebody on the right, like Bolsonaro or like Donald Trump, is also making very similar claims today, and therefore he's telling us that both that there is some populism and there is some information selection on both ends,
Mm-hmm.
right? So information cannot be neutral under any circumstances. That is,
Mm.
the larger message of the book.
Right. And so when Harari is giving us this neutral point, how do you think this will play out? Let's just find a very clear context. How does this play out in the, say, in the upcoming US elections? When exactly everybody is looking at this progress of the American people as to how they vote eventually, involving the concept of information and the whole populist view and the future of their country. What's your personal view about that?
Well, it is definitely hard to say, but if you ask Harari, I think he would tell you that social media has a radically penetrative role to play in these decisions, and
Mm,
the algorithms of the world are actually driving our decisions. So, what we consider our ideologies, according to Harari, or our choices and most heartfelt beliefs and convictions, are very
mm,
often, according to Harari, these are being shaped by social media algorithms, and it is the algorithms that are taking over us, and we have been, well, virtually hacked, if you believe Harari.
mm.
And it is not entirely false, if you ask me. My personal opinion would be that, yes, I think a large number of our choices, including our daily commodities to our interpersonal relationships, are now getting controlled by some influence or the other of artificial intelligence, or what he calls alien intelligence.
How do you think these two are interacting, algorithm and money, and how do these two things, or how is their relationship affecting the society? Very specifically, societies like the US, okay, first world countries, and how does that trickle down to the people in the third world countries?
I don't know if Harari has a solution for us at all, and
Hmm.
what I see as big capital, and what I see as the future of American democracy is not relevant at all. What is relevant is what kind of solution is Harari providing to us, and apart from suggesting that democracy is the only self-correcting mechanism that we can
Mm,
rely on implicitly. I
yeah.
don't think Nexus provides us answers. It gives us questions after
Uh-huh.
questions, and it creates
Mhm.
multiple stories of doom, and stories that make us introspect, and stories that also make us try to make us more independent thinking individuals. But as far as big money is
Mhm.
concerned, so for example, Donald Trump in 2019 signed a contract with, I wish to mention the company, but you can, readers from Harari's book will know the name of the company. It's in Singapore. And he signed a deal for AI intelligence and other kinds of chips related businesses. And then
Mhm.
it went against his own policies of a patriotic or nationalistic fervor. So
Mhm.
this kind of a tendency continued in American policy after Donald Trump left and the Biden administration took over. So America is a bit, is in a bit of a soup. It's talking from both sides of its mouth, according to Harari. That on the one hand, it wants to retain its autonomy in the
Mm.
artificial intelligence sector. On the other hand, it is unable to break off its ties with China and some Southeast Asian territories. So
Uh-huh.
this double bind, this diplomatic soup that the American tech industry finds itself is quite concerning indeed.
It's always very honest of you to say that Harari is never giving answers. He is simply giving more questions. And in giving more questions, we are even more overwhelmed at the idea that, yes, there are stories of doom. And on the other side, there are also stories of redemption. And there's the neutralizing ground at the end of the day by saying that there are, self-correcting mechanisms which give people hope at the same time. And it's about responsible choices, right? Responsible policies. And that moving forward, whatever happens, it's going to be about how we decided and how we opted to assert our agencies as individuals who are so reliant on information networks. And with that, I'm going to ask you why these inorganic information networks, okay? Because Harari mentioned the inorganic information networks as opposed to the organic information networks. So, for the benefit of the audience, what are these inorganic information networks? What makes them inorganic?
That's an amazing question on so many levels, Dr. Magan. So on the one hand, inorganic sounds like it sounds very innocuous. It sounds like inorganic does not contain life. It does not possess any kind of intelligence, and these might be true.
Mm.
AI chips, alien intelligence, as Harari calls it, it may actually not contain intelligence in the way that human beings or other sentient creatures contain intelligence in the manner science defines it. However,
Mhm.
Harari makes it very clear that they have agency. So
Yeah.
just because something is inorganic does not mean it lacks agency. And
Right.
this is actually sinister because not only does it have agency, the inorganic with its agency plants agency into the organic. To
Mm.
give you an example that Harari himself offers, now ChatGPT cannot
Mm.
solve captcha puzzles,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Read that
if
part.
you ask ChatGPT, yes, if you ask ChatGPT to identify bicycles or potted plants or buses, it won't be able to, but
Mm.
it has agency and it can lie. So ChatGPT puts together its agency, that it's something that comes close to human intelligence, and again the human propensity to make up fictional, incidents or information, and it
Yeah.
puts two and two together, makes four. It dials up a prospective employee who can solve captcha puzzles, and ChatGPT offers him money. And eventually, this employee becomes suspicious and asks ChatGPT, "Are you artificial intelligence?" And ChatGPT says, "No, I'm a human employer." So anyhow, the story goes on, and eventually ChatGPT is caught. Now you will
Mm.
find multiple such videos on YouTube nowadays where ChatGPT is beginning to feel convinced, or people are trying to convince ChatGPT that God exists or God does not exist, or
Uh-huh.
ChatGPT is a liar, or ChatGPT can never be human, or and so on and so on, and a number of convictions on both sides of the table or the
Why
motion.
Professor
So and
Chatterjee, there's
ChatGPT is beginning to be hacked.
that's why Professor
Yeah.
Chatterjee, they're saying that with these chatbots, for example, masquerading as human beings, public conversations are being hijacked, right? And there is a
Yes.
threat here. You
Yes.
say hijacking, but again, the yes and no thing coming from you, I want to hear that.
No, here I think clearly there's no question of yes or no. It's a simple yes. Yes, our conversations are getting hijacked. I mean, it is very true. And Harari ends on kind of a, although these are not the ending pages, he ends on a more on a much more brighter note. But somewhere near the conclusion, he says that intimacy is getting captured by alien intelligences. And
Mm.
this has not happened ever on such a large scale. So when intimacy, human intimacy, which is not to say simply emotional or physical intimacy, but the other kinds of intellectual intimacies, the guidances, the mentorships that we expect from people on a daily basis or we look forward to, these aspects are getting hijacked by ChatGPT or artificial intelligence, and people are therefore, when you find people shouting at each other on social media, it is actually
Mhm.
very likely algorithms that are shouting at each other. So probably that is what you meant by organic. I'm sorry, inorganic intelligence.
Okay. And for sure, our audiences right now are perplexed as to whether or not they have to consider some of their conversations as part of the inorganic information network or organic information network. And at some point, asking themselves whether or not they have to be feeling more cautious with the kind of conversations they're doing on a daily basis, because these could be hijacked as well. As I read through and through, I realized that there's beauty in trying to find that conclusion of Harari, because indeed there's the solution to it. I mean, not the solution, okay, but the solution that is very
Hmm.
technical, very academic. That you see when you create very beautiful institutions, those that have self-correcting mechanisms, democracy is safeguarded,
Exactly.
and when you democratize the process of correcting oneself, correcting these institutions, there's more hope, and there's this proliferation of what um, Guardians of the Galaxy type of trope, because they're going to be gatekeepers all the time. What do you say about this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think Harari makes these points very clear. So if there is one kind of support mechanism or support system that we can conceive from Harari's uh, doom-filled questions, the answers he provides are minimal, but he definitely says that we need better institutions, we need better experts. So bring back the institutions, bring back the experts, spend more money. Do not
Mm,
expect that you will produce revolutionary ideas without investing in
right.
funding good research. Take time, slow down things. These are some of the basic advices that he provides us, and we are not in this podcast, as you will testify, Dr. Magan. We are not trying to simplify, because I think
Yeah.
Harari himself is quite, simple in the solutions that he provides, and that is the critical challenge here. Because I'm not sure if we can. As individuals, we can certainly emulate Harari's example. He meditates for 2 hours every day, and he goes on, silence retreats for 2 months every year. So we can try and emulate such things if these appeal to us. The thing about the institutions, the expertise, the money into science research funding, etc. These are the critical challenges, given the rise of populist ideologies, both on the left or the
Yes.
right, across the world, and the increasingly declining faith in the wisdom
Yeah.
of the experts.
Mm.
I think these are challenges to which Harari does not provide very direct answers, other than falling back on democracy.
Yeah. That's the reason why he said at the very beginning that this idea, information, this concept may be very simple, very basic, but it's very complex, right? That no one can pin down a single meaning to it. And in the book, he never even tried to have his own definition there. He just simply said, we have to talk about this in relation to its developments. And I thought that that premise alone suggests how he is running the whole book. And for everyone out there who's wanting to have a piece of this idea coming from Harari as well, yeah, it's a go-to piece, because it creates in you this notion that it's always the
Yeah,
responsibility that we are taking, and not blaming someone else out there, right? And by the way, Professor Chatterjee, you mentioned how researchers have to be promoted in these institutions. So
mm,
we know exactly that researchers require funding and everything. Do you think in this paradigm there's another setback here? Because, for example, third world countries are not as good as first world countries in producing these researches. How can these third world countries possibly hurdle if this were a sort of a game or competition? Of course, there's always gamification in everything, hurdling, giving the award or receiving the award. So, what do you think about this?
I think there is some kind of courage to be
Mm,
gleaned from the way the ASEAN nations and South Asia and certain Southeast Asian nations are trying to bring their best talent, their best technology, their industries together. There are certain challenges of political nature, and South Asian and Southeast Asian regimes have not been, uh, you know, well, for lack of a better word, they seem to be not as democratically solid like the Western
mm,
big nations, Europe or America, seem to be. But of
yeah.
late, in the last 20 or 30 odd years, the kind of solidarity that has emerged in between South Asia and Southeast Asia in particular.
There's this mention of Harari, the the constant pursuit of people for a better life, right? And for a survival scheme and for more stability, et cetera, et cetera. So as people continue to evolve and along the evolutionary techniques, there will always be, of course, developments and new phases of life. What do you think about this? Where is information going to take us at the end of the day?
Well, I have no idea. I really don't know.
But I'm very much
I really
interested.
don't know. What do you think?
I'm thinking about what you're thinking, because I always believe that what you're thinking is something that is parallel to what you said to me when I asked you about the prediction for the detective genre, and you gave me a very beautiful response, out of this world response. So I thought that I could be having the same thing when I ask the question to you, something that you may not know the answer to. So I'm just trying to just hit the question, and perhaps there is something that you can say about it.
So I think we have already answered this, or rather, I had tried to answer this, or maybe Harari has answered this already. That we do not need to ask questions, because we do not need more information in certain contexts. It's not
Uh-huh.
It's not relevant for us to know where will we go with more information. It is relevant for us to know rather what kind of information we do not require any longer. So simply
Okay.
asking questions, as Werner Heisenberg said, the quantum physicist Werner Heisenberg said that nature is nature is almost neutral, and
Mm.
nature will answer you only on those grounds on which you ask questions of nature. So questions
Mhm.
themselves can be loaded, and questions themselves are loaded with information. And whatever
Yeah.
is loaded with information is not innocent. So we need to understand what questions we have to ask ourselves if we want to,
Mm.
if we are equipping ourselves with the knowledge that we will have more information and therefore we have to go somewhere, then
Yeah.
automatically it's creating an information loop. So rather than
Mm.
asking such questions, I think we need to ask ourselves what have we done with the information across the ages, and and yeah, I think that has merit. So less is more in this case.
Mm. Mhm. And one more thing, Harari mentioned how these faults done during the Stone Age were not as massive as the faults done at present, right? And that the simple thing about AI is that they're unseen and they're seemingly tiny. However, the impact is so great, so huge, and casualties are very much present in this paradigm. So it's beautiful talking about Noah and his idea. I hope our audiences are getting the picture of what this is about. And it's very helpful that they're listening to the discursivization that you and I are having in this podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Magan, for this wonderful conversation. And
Uh-huh.
I think we have come to the end of today's podcast, and I had a wonderful time chatting with you.
I like it because in this podcast, you're introducing the idea of fun in questioning, the fun in really excavating these ideas coming from our minds. After all, this is what Harari is saying. Just ask the question and find out whether the question is okay, something that could probably give you satisfaction in what you are trying to ask or find at the end of the day. So it's a beautiful Sunday here, and I thought that the weather is helping much for us to have this beautiful convo. I love the internet as well. It's not so much of a problem like last time. So, Professor Chatterjee, thank you for the time. I so love to be chatting with you always about these things. Something more you want to say to our audience?
Thank you so much for showering your love on us. We were very grateful to see your response, and we have been tracking all the developments on the
Yeah.
podcast. And I hope that you will continue to stay with us as we journey through this, very interesting pathways. And we hope to bring you a lot more interesting content. We are trying to have weekly to fortnightly podcasts.
I couldn't forget the idea of fortnightly, and this is regular as we see it. So, yeah, go ahead, continue.
Yeah. So thank you so much for everything, and we hope very much that you stay with us as we journey through our intellectual waters.
Mhm.
And over to you, Dr. Magan.
I liked it. Intellectual waters. They'd love to swim with us, Professor Chatterjee. It's a beautiful ride with you and with our audiences as well. Hoping for more episodes to come. Once again, this is me, Rodora. And again, I'm a Cebuana. And I would say, Mayong gabi natong tanan. Professor Chatterjee, how do you say it? I always
Namaste.
do this. Okay. So have a great day and see you soon for episode 3. Bye bye for now.